When we kind of talk about income or passive income, what does that really mean? And the idea is, passive income is usually defined as income that doesn't require daily work. However you want to define work, but it's basically low effort income is kind of the idea. Now, your definition of passive may be different from someone else's, and how much effort that actually requires, or what your definition of low effort means. I think that's the first
part of the problem is the way that each individual defines things in this particular case clearly is different.
Yes, but the idea is trying to generate some type of an income stream that's steady, reliable, predictable, and not volatile. Right, within the confines of a good, reliable income plan that you can generate income within the retirement structure.
Let's move into some types of passive income.
Yep.
So that everybody knows, because most people think about, when we start talking about passive income, you already alluded to this, people tend to think of rental income. I'm going to buy a house or houses, and people are going to pay me rent, and that rent is greater than my expense, and therefore that is a form of passive income. I think that's what most people are thinking about, but there's a lot of other forms of passive income as well.
All right, welcome back to another edition of the Retirement Planning Happy Hour. Eric Douglas here with Chris Vaughn, part of the Family Wealth Planning Partners team here. We greatly appreciate you spending some time here with us as we talk all things finance, investments, retirement planning over a pour of some bourbon. Yep. So today, I think I'll introduce the topic here for you real quick, and then you can introduce the bourbon. Topic for today, passive income. And we're going to bust some myths about passive income.
We're going to start with that one,
And starting with the term passive, and I'm using air quotes for those of us, or those of you that are listening on podcasts, right? Because in most cases, there's not really anything passive about most traditional passive income sources, as most people like to refer to them. But you hear so much about passive income streams. Everybody wants like some kind of side hustle. Everybody wants to generate passive income. Yep. What does that really look like, and what does that really entail? And we're going to go through a number of different types of passive income, some of the most common forms of income out there, and we'll kind of evaluate how passive each one of them really is, right? And so we'll go through some of those myths. But first, why don't you introduce what we're tasting today?
So today we are drinking the Basil Hayden 10-year-old. So we have done, if I remember correctly, we have done all of the original Jim Beam small batches or variations on them at some point in time, except for Basil Hayden. So this came out back in 1992 when Jim Beam came up with their small batch. And just a reminder, the small batch, there were 4 originally. There was Knob Creek, Baker's, Booker's, and Basil Hayden. And just by the way, we did drink the 18-year-old Knob Creek on an episode sometime back, and you loved it.
Oh, yeah.
Last night, I got to try the 21-year-old. That's their big thing.
Yeah.
If I took an oak tree and handed it to a giant, and he used it like a baseball bat and hit you in the head with it, that was the 21 year. It was overwhelming. We did water it down a little bit, and it got better, but it was overwhelming, and it's a proof that older doesn't mean better. A lot of people are like, oh, the older the bourbon is, the better. No, that's not true. It was wow, and I'm glad that it was not my money that was spent on that bottle. How's that? So
there you go. Have we done a Baker's? You said.
I think we have done a Baker's. I
don't recall if we have or not.
There's a 7-year that we've done, but you know what? We'll look back, and if not, then we'll bring some of that in. The Basil Hayden, when they originally released this, what they were going for was a more sophisticated high rye. So when you put a lot of rye grain in a high rye bourbon, it tends to get a lot of spiciness to it. And I don't mean heat spicy, I mean flavor spicy. The problem is it can be a little overwhelming, to use that term again. So what they did with Basil Hayden, the idea was that this is going to be a high rye, but they wanted it to be sophisticated. And the way they dealt with that was they went low proof. This is an 80 proof bourbon. All Basil Hayden is 80 proof. And if you know anything about bourbon, 80 proof, so 40% alcohol. If you drop down to 79 proof, it's not bourbon anymore. Legally, it's not bourbon. It's got to be at least 80 proof. So this is as low as they could go. 80 proof bourbons have a tendency to lose flavor. So most people who really get into bourbons, they don't like anything that low proof because you lose a lot of flavor.
Definitely easier to drink because it's not
Yes.
as not as much alcohol in it, right? But
that being said, the original Basil Hayden, I'm not a fan because it's too low proof and you lose flavor. But having had this one, this is an annual release that they do. It's not hard to find. If you go to the big box stores, your little local liquor store might get 1 or 2 cases, and when it's gone, it's gone. But the big box stores, you were seeing this product from last year up until just a couple of months ago, right? So, and now you're seeing the new ones out. So it's not hard to find. This is a $70 bottle. I think actual retail is $75, but I picked this up for $70. So it's a little bit above your normal price point, but when it's 10 years in the barrel, the price is going to tend to go up a little bit.
Sure.
And along with that comes some complexity of flavor. So once again, I'm not a big fan of the original. I am a huge fan of the 10-year, though. So, and you said you had not tried it yet.
So I've had the original.
I thought it'd be a fun one.
It's funny you say that. I've had the original Basil. Not a big fan. I've had the toasted.
Yeah. There are 6 expressions currently.
Yeah, I do like the Basil Hayden toast.
Right.
But those are really the only 2 variations I've had.
There's
I've not
toast
had
is good.
Yeah, the toast is good. I've not had the subtle smoke and the
there's
rye.
Let's see. There's a dark rye, which I actually am a fan of. That's almost like a dessert. There's a let's see. There is a red wine cask finished. I have not tried that.
Yeah.
And there's another one I know I'm missing. I can't remember what it is. But like I said, there's currently 6. They have had other variations that they do from time to time. They kind of play with this brand a little bit. Some of them have been really good. Some of them, you just got to try them. They are not outrageously expensive, so it's not a huge deal to try them. They are very proud of the presentation of the bottle. They call this the belt, the little copper strap, and it is neat. They used to, the label was actually a physical label that went over the neck and then down the back side, but it got torn very easily, so they've pretty much gone away from that.
Yeah, I remember
presentation-wise, this is a great bottle of bourbon if you just from the look of it. So that's what we're drinking today is the Basil Hayden 10-year.
All right. Well, we'll enjoy that while we talk all about passive income today, right? So let's start with a couple of myths.
All right.
And then we'll kind of come back and go into the types of income. But the myths that we kind of want to discuss today as we talk about the different types of passive income, well, just income in general, but more specifically passive income. Passive income is free money, right?
Right.
You hear that a lot, and you hear it all the time, like on TV shows or, like social media influencers. They're usually probably trying to sell you some type of a system, right? Or, everyone wants to get some kind of side hustle because there's always this belief that, passive income is free money and I don't have to work for it. So that's definitely one of the things that we want to dispel. Real estate is always better than the stock market.
Okay.
We want to dispel that myth specifically because when most people refer to passive income, most of the time they are referring to
real estate, yeah.
They're referring to real estate. Real estate can be a fantastic investment, so we're not
saying it's a bad thing.
Yep,
but we're just saying it's different.
But we want to dispel the notion of passive income specifically. High yield equals better income. You hear that term a lot, especially in our business. You hear the term high yield. Okay. And we're going to talk about what high yield actually means because I don't think most people truly understand where that term comes from, what it derives from, and truly the additional risk you have to take in order to receive a higher yield, right? A higher amount of income. So high yield does not necessarily equal better income. Right. And we are going to talk about annuities as well. We've done annuity episodes before, and we'll probably do more again in the future because we just come up against them so many times. With clients walking in the door with old annuities, they've been sold. And so it's something that we have to talk a lot about. And you talk so much about annuities, and the way that you phrase this is fantastic. And I've been stealing this for the last several years is the word annuity means nothing. It's the word in front of the word annuity that means everything. Yeah. And not all annuities are created equal, right? Right. But as it relates to annuities today, we're going to talk probably more specifically about income annuities. Right. Because we're talking about passive forms of income. So annuities aren't necessarily all good or bad. They are a tool, but we want to kind of talk about them as a tool to generate passive income within the context of a retirement portfolio. So those are kind of that's kind of our starting point. Those are the myths that we are going to bust, if you will.
We're going to be Mythbusters
We're
today.
going to be
the
Mythbusters today,
I miss that show so much.
I haven't got that show.
I love that show.
I guess it's been off for quite a while.
It's been off for a while, yeah.
But, so we got to have some notes here and outline because, we're getting very sophisticated on this podcast now, and we're actually playing ahead a little bit. We didn't always used to do that. But we have a little bit of an outline to guide us within the conversation today to make sure we stay on track somewhat. But, when we kind of talk about income or passive income, what does that really mean? And the idea is, passive income is usually defined as income that doesn't require daily work.
Right.
However you want to define work, but it's basically low effort income is kind of the idea. Now, your definition of passive may be different from someone else's, and how much effort that actually requires or what your definition of low effort means. I think that's the first
part of the problem is the way that each individual defines things in this particular case clearly is different.
Yes, but the idea is trying to generate some type of an income stream that's steady, reliable, predictable, and not volatile. Right, within the confines of a good, reliable income plan that you can generate income within the retirement structure. What's interesting, though, is most of the time when I hear passive income, I'm not hearing about it in the terms of a retirement plan. And we're the ones that generate these income plans specifically for clients, right? But most of the time when I'm hearing passive income, I'm hearing it from like younger generations that are trying to create a side hustle or trying to generate some second form of income. Now, we can contemplate the reasons why. We can talk about inflation, and we can talk about the value of the dollar going down, or just people needing more money just because of cost of living today. And so the idea of some type of a second income sounds really, really appealing to a lot of people. But here's the reality. In order to generate some type of a passive income, you can't start from nothing. And that's what's interesting, because anytime you want to generate any type of an income, you have to start with some type of upfront capital.
I think that's the first myth that you talked about.
Yes.
Is that passive income is free money was the myth that you were talking about. Well, it's not free. Nothing's free. You're going to have to make a sacrifice of some kind. Now, the question is the sacrifice worth the benefit to it? And I think that's where you were going with that.
Yeah, so you're analyzing, obviously, the trade-off, risk versus reward, as with any type of investment, right? How much income do we need to generate versus, something else that I could have done with that money. But at the end of the day, to generate any level of income, you have to start with some capital up front. You're taking some level of risk. You are bringing money to the table, okay? Yep. And usually it's going to require some work up front. And so those are that's kind of a basic definition of passive income.
So let's move into some types of passive income.
Yep.
So that everybody knows, because most people think about, when we start talking about passive income, you already alluded to this, people tend to think of rental income. I'm going to buy a house or houses, and people are going to pay me rent, and that rent is greater than my expense, and therefore that is a form of passive income. I think that's what most people are thinking about, but there's a lot of other forms of passive income as well.
For sure, but if you start
you want to dive into rental property first?
Yeah, so let's talk about rental property, right? So, what are some of the pros? Cash flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, that's a big pro. Equity within a home. The idea is you take out a loan or use some debt to build a house or to buy a house, but the house is being paid for by the renter, right? The mortgage is being paid for by the renter, so you are, in theory, accruing equity every month.
Right.
Unless you take out one of these new 50-year mortgages that they're being floated around right now, which are a horrible idea.
Oh,
anybody that tells you a 50-year mortgage is a good idea, laugh at them in their face. It's a horrible idea. I don't care who you are, regardless. But the idea is you're obviously building equity. You're receiving some level of cash flow.
Right, and you were just talking about this. I think with young people, the real attraction here, and when we say young people, we're not talking about teenagers and early 20s. We're typically talking about 30 and 40-year-olds, but obviously there's others. I think the attraction here, you were just talking about the fact that the renter pays your mortgage. And what you mean by that is the amount that you charge in rent exceeds what that mortgage and your other expenses will be. So you don't have to pay for this real estate, which is, in theory, appreciating in value, right? But I think therein lies the first big con, is that you had to take the risk to take out the mortgage in the first place, or to put up the cash if you had cash to buy the property. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad risk. I'm just saying it's a risk, and therefore it's not completely free, if you will.
And you have to evaluate risk on a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Because anything that you do with money, you're taking a risk.
Yep.
Because it's a risk relative to some other opportunity that you could have taken with that money. So if I'm buying a house, I could have kept that money in the bank and put money in a CD, right? So the risk I'm taking is if we look at kind of the nominal risk-free rate, which is typically referred to what you can get on like a money market account, which right now, as of December 5th, I think right now they're right at around 4%.
I was going to say just a fraction under
maybe a fraction under 3 point. They're basically 3.94%. So if you look at like kind of let's say 4%, because that's an even round number, as the nominal risk-free rate, you have to evaluate anything that you do with that money against that nominal risk-free rate.
Okay.
Am I going to generate some relative return greater than that 4%? Because the alternative of taking no risk and just putting my money in a money market fund, it's 4%. That's going to be my income. That's the income that's going to be generated. So that's always what you're having to evaluate. So to your point, there's always a risk that you are taking. And most people don't necessarily think about real estate as a risk because they think of it as a tangible asset, right? It's a tangible asset. It's always going to hold value. Real estate never goes down, which is another
not
myth.
true, although it usually never goes down. I think the big pros to this would be the income flow and the equity. The fact that historically real estate always appreciates, and yes, there have been some depreciation parts in the real estate history, but if you give them a big enough window, they always win, right?
It's weird. It's weird how that correlates to the stock market too, right?
It is, and I figured we'd get to that in a little bit. Yeah. But the big pro here is that it is a flow of income that you don't have to do anything for. That's the misnomer. Is that you don't have to do anything. It's truly passive, and that really leads into the cons here. Is it's not really passive. We did a pod on this several months back where we talked about real estate investing. And the conclusion that we came up with, based upon what our clients who are also real estate investors will tell you, is you have to have multiple real estate properties.
You have to scale it.
You have to scale it in order for it to really be profitable for you. If you only own one, you end up putting so much time into it. It's anything but passive at that point in time. So therein lies one of the big cons. One of the other big cons is what happens if you need the cash. Real estate is an illiquid investment. And what we mean by liquidity, for those of you that don't know, is just how rapidly you can turn an asset into cash. So physical bills in your wallet, that's as liquid as it gets. Money that's in the bank, you can get that out with an ATM card in a couple of minutes and a PIN code. Very, very liquid. In order to turn real estate into cash, you, number one, have to sell it. And if you're going to sell, that means you're dependent upon other people. You have to find a buyer. You have to deal with title transfers and mortgage companies. There's other people involved. Or you have to take out debt on it. Yes, there's costs involved to all of that. So that's why it's considered illiquid. Realistically, to turn real estate into cash, you have to budget 2 to 3 months as a bare minimum, right? There's one of the biggest issues. Now, one of the other big issues, and this is where scaling up being a landlord is a big deal. Let's just say you own, 5 to 10 pieces of property, right? And one of them gets torn up by one of your tenants. And let's just be real honest, it happens, okay?
A lot more regularly than you probably think.
Yeah, more than you think. Okay, so now first of all, you have to go through the process of getting that tenant out so they don't continue to damage your property. Now, once you get them out, now you have to fix that property up before you can get it re-rented. Well, when you own 5 or 10 properties, you've got those other ones still generating that quote-unquote passive income while you're doing that, right? But if you only own 1 or maybe 2, you're not making any money while that's going through, but you are spending a lot of money, right? And you're spending money on the repairs. If you've got a mortgage on it, you're still having to pay that mortgage. The bank doesn't care that your renter tore up your house. They still they want their paycheck, right? And you're responsible for that. So that's one of the big issues. That's why scaling real estate is so important to make it an effective tool.
And I don't think we've ever talked about this on the pod before, but Airbnbs as well. So most people think about rental properties.
Great point.
But what's becoming more and more popular is Airbnbs, right?
Yeah.
Short-term rentals, STRs. Right. And I don't know how in vogue those still are. I think those are becoming a little less popular, but
I think that's because we got a little oversaturated.
I think it got a little
and I think as that stabilizes, it'll probably pick back up.
Yeah. So and a lot of that's going to depend upon location.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, location. But short-term rentals require their own. They probably even require even far more maintenance because if you have someone that's in there for 3-4 days, well, then it's like a hotel. You got to go back and,
right.
You got to get the cleaner in, and you got to come and clean up after them, and kind of reset everything, and you have to restock everything far more often, and so it's a different type of rental property with its own different sets of risk.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, there is a level of risk, and anything that you do to make that investment more passive is going to require more money,
right? Or
rather, a loss of income,
right?
Because in order to truly make real estate more passive, what do you have to do? You have to hire a property manager. It's great, and it's probably a good way to do it in order, especially if you are trying to scale, like you were talking about, because you can't personally manage that many properties. But as you hire a property manager, that costs money.
That's interesting that you say that. We were talking when we were putting this together today. To your point, we actually are planning a little bit before we just get in here and start talking. And you made a great point with the increased income from a passive investment, like real estate's a great example. With that increased income comes more risk. So, for example, to increase the likelihood of a good, steady income on real estate, you need to own multiple properties. With multiple properties comes more work. So you get into hiring a manager, blah, blah, blah. The point is, in order to get that greater yield, if you will, you have to take on more and more less passive activities, or you have to take on more risk. So if I'm doing all the work myself and I own 5 properties, it is not passive. Something's always broken, right? If I hire a company to do it, now it's more passive to me. Now I have an additional expense that goes along with that, and they're in more risk.
Yeah, because then now we're not talking about return on investment.
Right.
Now we're talking about return on hassle, ROH. Yeah. And I know one client in particular that sold an apartment building because he said he was making money on it, but it was just a pain in his butt. He said he was tired of dealing with renters. The turnover was pretty high. Stuff was always breaking, and he just said, "Screw this! I'm making more money doing other things."
Right.
And it was just it was too much of a hassle, and it wasn't passive like it was supposed to be. Right? It was requiring too much time to make it worth his while. So all that stuff is great, right? Rental properties are great until we just had a really bad cold spell come through.
Yeah,
come through. It's still here.
It's still here, right?
Which that's a whole other side topic. The older I get, the more Florida looks really, really good to me.
We are literally going on vacation to Mexico next month in January, and I was looking forward to it. Right?
Yeah.
Let me tell you what, as cold as it is, and of course I've got my boys doing things around the house.
Yeah.
Some of those things are very cold things. They are super excited right now, not because they're going to go on vacation, but because they're going to go someplace warm, right? Because it's been a pretty cold November and December. But to your point, when you have that cold snap, or in the summertime when you've got that, that heat wave comes through, and the air conditioning units and the furnaces and everything start going out, renters are not very patient people when they're freezing or when they're sweating to death inside of what they're paying rent on. It's not very passive income when you're out there fixing it or having to find somebody to fix it or whatever the case might be.
Especially if you own property like out of town or
Yes.
something like that.
Even much, much worse when you can't physically get to it yourself.
And my son, the hockey player, was taking the trash out the other day to the curb with his shirt off. So...
Okay, my kids are not hockey players. They are not into the cold weather.
He's a little more immune to the cold than I am at this point. But anyway, that's another episode. So another way of generating, because you hear about REITs a lot. So when I say REIT, real estate investment trusts.
Right.
So these are basically funds that are invested in physical real estate properties. There's a number of different ways to invest in real estate, but the idea is to own real estate without having to own the toilet brush.
Right.
i.e., you are not personally responsible for the maintenance and the property management.
You're buying into it along with other investors. It's not solely your issue to deal with.
So there's several other different levels of risk here.
Yep.
Different kinds of risk, right? Different types of risk. There's always risk, right? So in this case, most commonly, real estate investment trusts are sold as alternative investments.
Yep.
Highly, highly illiquid.
Yep.
You put your money into this investment. If there's any type of a cash call, you might have to put more money in because, let's say there was a fire on one of the properties that you owned, that this investment group owned.
Right.
Okay. And they're going to have a cash call to raise more cash to cover the cost of that loss or to cover, the cost of the repairs or whatever it may be. Right. So that's definitely another different type of risk. Sometimes the yields, especially in the early years, the income is going to be relatively low until they can kind of establish a better footprint or more of a foothold and start generating more rental income as they buy more properties, right? As they scale and grow, whatever their investments might be. And of course, as they, hopefully those assets appreciate, just like a single family residence might, right? But typically when you're investing in a real estate investment trust, most commonly you're investing in more commercial sized projects. Right. You're investing in apartment complexes, industrial buildings, warehouses, things like that. As opposed to just single-family residences, things are going to show up on HGTV, basically. Typically, you're not going to get as much income. They are more passive because you're not the one that's having to go fix the HVAC systems at 2 a.m. But you're also, once again, trading income because essentially someone else is responsible for finding the investments, for sourcing the investments, for handling the property management. You're just kind of throwing some money at the table to help cover the cost of some of these things.
Right.
And at the end of the day, you're going to generate some level of income on a monthly, quarterly basis, whatever the case may be. And hopefully those assets appreciate to some type of a liquidity event in, let's say, 8 to 10 years, which is usually the time frame that they try to give. Yeah. So once again, more passive, less income.
Right.
Okay?
Well, and here's you were talking about trade-offs. When you deal with alternatives, and to your point, the vast majority of REITs are sold in the form of alts, and the vast majority of alts are a form of REITs. Those two go together. One of the other big trade-offs is the liquidity that you mentioned. Yes, there are some times where you have to put some more money in. The bigger one that we see is you can't get your money out when you want to. It's just not the way these things are built. So, for example, when you own a piece of property and you say, you know what, this thing is not profitable for me anymore. It's more of a hassle than it's worth, right? Your guy that you talked about with the apartment complex, you can choose to sell, and if you get the price right, you'll find a buyer. Yeah, there's a process you got to go through, and it takes a little time, but you decide when to initiate the process. That's not true with alternatives, right? What's going to happen is they're going to make an offering, right? You have to elect to get into that offering to get some of your money out. So if you've got, say, $100,000 invested in this alternative, and the point comes in your life where you need that cash to do something else with, whatever it is, you can't get it out no matter what if they're not making an offering. And if they do make an offering and you don't get in line early enough with the other investors in it, you still may not be able to get your money out or may not be able to get all of it out. So the biggest problem with alternatives by far is the liquidity issue. I am not a fan, I know you're not either, of using these types of investments with people who are not fairly high value investors. These are great investments for people who have some money on the side, and if that money literally disappeared, poof, it would not impact them in any way. Great, this is something that you can do, and we all know people like that. But unfortunately, they're frequently told, or sold, I should say, to people that cannot afford to lose, right? And rule number one is don't lose money, right? Warren Buffett. So they're sold, and they're sold with these, how would you like to get involved in this project? I mean, this is the way that wealthy people invest, right? Well, but wealthy people can afford to lose that amount. And that's where we see these being improperly used all too frequently.
And once again, this is going to be the theme, and this will not be the last time I say it in this podcast episode, but the level of passivity relative to your income is directly correlated to the amount of income
Right.
that you are going to receive. The more passive an investment, the less income you're going to receive.
Yep.
Okay. As you add less and less, or add, more activity, right?
Then you have a better chance, right?
Then you have a better chance of generating a little bit more income from your investments. But the less involved you are, the less the profit or the less the income to you is going to be.
Now, before we completely dump on REITs, which that's what it sounds like we're doing, that they can be very good investments, but you don't necessarily long-term investments, correct? But they do not have to be purchased in the form of an alternative investment where you lose that liquidity. There are a lot of REITs that are out there that you can purchase as mutual funds,
Sure,
or that you can purchase as ETFs, which you can guaranteed sell that back whenever you want to. So there is a way to expose yourself to that real estate, to that passive income.
as an asset class.
As an asset class, exactly.
What's interesting is most people do not like those funds nearly as much. And this is the reason why I always compare, when people take a step back and look at real estate, what do they always tell you about real estate? It's a long-term investment. It never goes down. It always appreciates in value. You could say the exact same thing about the stock market. The problem is you can look at a ticker symbol every single day.
Right.
And you can see the volatility of the stock market, and you can see the crash in the stock market in 2008, and you can see what happened in 2022, and you can see the daily volatility. Like the month of November, we just had a little bit of volatility in the market, right? We were down in November. You don't see that with your house.
Right.
The only two numbers with your house are the day you buy and the day you sell. And if there's a difference, you made some money or not, and that's all you care about. But the stock market, we're so intrinsically trained to see what the value of our investments are on a daily basis. Right. If your house could do that, you would be far less inclined to think of it as some type of a fantastic investment without risk. But because you don't see the daily fluctuations, people tend to think of real estate as a much safer investment when in reality it's not.
It does have those fluctuations.
It absolutely does.
You just don't see them because they're not reported on the news. You can't, turn the app on your phone and watch the value of your real estate go up and down. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. But you can with those mutual funds and those ETFs. And to your point, it spooks some people because they think that this is super stable, when in reality, they go up and down in value just like anything else does.
If you could sell your house every single day, you would not sell it at the exact same price every single day.
Correct. Exactly right.
Just like if you put your house on the market in the spring versus, Christmas, right? You're going to get two different price points. But most people just don't see that. And they don't, how many times do people sell a house in reality? It's just not something that happens very often.
The average person does it a handful of times in their lifetime.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've done it far more than most. Me and my sister counted up because our parents got divorced when we were kids, and we counted up the number of times we've moved, and it's like astronomical, the number of times that we've moved. But we are so far in the norm because when I married my wife, she moved out of the house that she grew up in.
Yeah.
When we got married, to come live with me. So anyway.
All right.
So that's probably, enough about real estate investment trust, but it's, once again, you're getting exposure to real estate without taking some of the risks of a property manager directly,
right?
I should say, but that's going to affect the amount of income that you receive. Fixed income, bonds. Right. You want to take that one?
Sure. I'll start with this one. So I think the first thing you have to start with when you talk about bonds is that the average person out there doesn't really understand what they are. It's very simple. It's debt. All you're doing is when you buy a bond, you're loaning money to a company or to the government or a government. And in turn, they have to pay you back at a predetermined rate, right? Just as if you were borrowing money from the bank. You go to the bank, you borrow money for your mortgage or whatever the case might be. You have a certain amount of time that you have to pay that back. And you have to make payments on some level of schedule. And there's an interest, right? The bank's interest is that you have to pay them interest. That's why they're willing to do it. Imagine reversing the roles. That's really all a bond is. You are loaning money out, and they have to pay it back with interest, okay? So that's really where it starts. All right, some pros to purchasing bonds, all right? The first one would be predictable income. Right? So if you purchase a bond and it says that bond is going to pay 5.5% over the next, let's say, 10 years, you know that you're going to get that coupon of 5.5%. You're going to get that year in and year out. And then they're not paid annually as a general rule.
And then at the end of the 10 years, you're going to
get your money back.
Yep.
Right. So you get your interest over that period of that term. And at the end, you get the original amount that you invested back. Now, just like mortgages are done all the time, you also have the ability to sell that, right? So, for example, let's just say I buy $1,000 worth of bonds and I'm getting 6% on those bonds. And right now, I'm very happy with that. But at some point in time down the road, the average bond that's out there is getting 7.5%. Well, my 6% is not quite so attractive to me now, so I want to dump this thing, right? Well, I can sell it to you, Eric. You are not going to pay me full price for it, though, because the yield that you're going to get, now you're going to get my 6%, whereas you could go buy something else at 7 or 7.5. You're going to not pay me the full value of them, what's called par, because there's got to be something in it for you. Otherwise, why would you want to buy it? So that's kind of the way that bonds are bought and sold.
So I'll buy it at a discount, right?
Right. It's bought at a discount. Or the opposite would be true too. So I've got that 6% bond, and right now you can't get a bond for better than 4. Well, you're definitely wanting to buy that bond from me, but I'm now going to sell it at a premium, right? Because you got to give me a good reason to want to unload this because I'm getting such a great rate. So bonds have a tendency to be very, very sensitive to interest rates.
Yep.
And we've talked about this over and over again. Right now, the Fed is very active. Unfortunately, they not only are active, they love press conferences, right? And we've talked about that.
Yeah.
But if you think about those bond owners, that fixed income, they're counting on that income, they become very sensitive. What I've never understood is people who are counting on that 6% that bond pays, and they own the bond. You know how what you got to do to continue to get your 6%? Don't sell it.
Yeah.
But that's not the way people think. They're like, oh, I can do better, or and they start thinking about selling it. As long as you hold on to it and the entity that you own that debt, that company doesn't go under, you will continue to get that whatever percentage rate, that coupon rate is.
Now, it's worth noting, we're talking about individual bonds here. So you can also buy bond funds.
Correct.
But those are going to fluctuate in value. So whereas that bond, if you buy that 10-year bond that you were talking about, it's not going to fluctuate in value, and I'm going to get a set interest rate, right? But if I were to go to sell it, I might have to sell it at a premium or at a discount.
Right.
I might make money or I might not, but it doesn't go up or down. And at the end of
the interest rate is locked in, right?
And at the end of the 10 years, I will get my money back, and I will continue to get paid whatever amount of money, whatever the coupon rate was, right? A bond fund is going to be more volatile.
Correct.
And especially when we're talking about an active Federal Reserve and with what they do, and we've talked about this before with how they manipulate interest rates, bond funds specifically, which are far more common than individual bonds, far more prevalent in the market, those are going to fluctuate to a far greater degree than an individual bond will.
Right.
So that's definitely worth noting. So you absolutely can lose money on a bond fund. So, you have your interest rate risks. Yep. They're directly tied to interest rates. Credit risk for lower quality bonds. That's something important because we talked about high yield earlier. So let's talk about what the term high yield means.
Okay.
And where it comes from.
So when we talk about high yield bonds, we are talking about bonds that get a higher yield than a similar class that we call investment grade bonds.
And when we say yield,
we're talking about the percentage that you're getting. Yeah, the income that you're getting. That's yield when you're dealing with bonds. Okay, first of all, I don't want to totally poo-poo high yield bonds.
No, not at all.
They are a legitimate investment class, and they are a legitimate portion of a portfolio. But you need to understand why those companies or governments are paying a higher yield. It's because their creditworthiness is not as good as those investment grade ones, right? Yeah. So think about it. Just like people, if you, Eric, if you go out and you pay all your bills on time every time, you always pay your credit cards off every time, you are always, I can absolutely count on you. If I loan you money, I'm going to get it back in exactly the manner that we agreed to or better. You're going to have a high credit score, right? You're eventually going to end up in the upper 700s or 800s. But if you Every now and then you miss payments, you run late from time to time, things like that. You're going to have a lower credit score. That's the way it works. So if I'm going to loan you money and you have a high credit score, I'm not taking as much risk, so I'm going to give you a lower rate that I'm going to charge you on. If you have a lower credit score, I'm going to charge you more interest because you are a higher risk to me. Yep. Businesses and governments work exactly the same way, except they don't have the numbers like we do as individuals. They have letters, right? High yield simply means that they have a lower credit score, and therefore they have to pay more. Now, remember, if you own a bond, you're loaning money out, right? We used to have a different name before we called them high yield, because high yield is actually the politically correct phrase. We used to call them junk bonds. So if you've ever heard the phrase junk bonds, that's a misnomer. That doesn't mean that they're horrible, right? Junk suggests that these are garbage. That's not true, but there is a greater risk that goes along with it.
Because they have a lower credit rating.
They have a lower credit rating. That's exactly right. Go
ahead.
Basically, you have to treat it as an asset class. If you go out and you buy the bond of, say, a local government because they're trying to raise money for a construction project or something, that's fine. That's a muni bond. You can go out and do that. But understand, if they have a lower credit rating, you are going to expect to get a higher yield out of it because you are taking a greater risk that that government or company, in many cases, is simply not going to pay their bills on time. And you are one of their bills. So you have to think about it that way from the purpose of income.
This is why, for all you political news junkies, when you see on TV or you hear about the credit rating of the United States.
Bingo.
Right? Whenever you hear about the credit rating of the United States going down, people freak out about that, because what that means is the government is going to have to pay you more money in yield, more money in income on all of the bonds, all the money that you are essentially that they are borrowing. It's going to cost them more money to service their own debt, which means more money in taxes going to service debt
in order to service the debt.
And at the end of the day, that means more money out of our pockets.
They're going to have to raise the taxes in order to pay that bill.
So whenever you hear any news about the United States Credit Agency or the credit rating, this is what they're referring to, and this is why it's a big deal. Because if our credit rating goes down, it costs more money to service debt because they have to pay more money to its bondholders, because the bondholders are taking a greater amount of risk in theory because our credit rating is not as good. So the analogy that you use is a mortgage borrower. If I have a 550 credit score, I'm going to have to pay a much higher rate in order to borrow money from the bank.
Because the bank is taking a higher risk.
Absolutely.
That's really all that this is. Simple. Yeah. So you mentioned when we were talking about bond funds, they are more volatile. However, the idea is that you're lowering some of your risk in that there are more bonds that are out there. So if one or two of them end up being a little behind or they don't pay out, you're still getting it from everything else. So it's just simply a matter of reducing risk. And it also takes the research concept off the table a little bit. If you are buying individual bonds, especially if you're doing this on your own, you're having to research why I want to buy that bond. And unfortunately, most people are looking at, because it pays me X percent, right? Well, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a really good bond, right? Just like any other investment, it may be a good one, it may be bad. By buying a bond fund or a bond ETF, you're just simply trying to spread that risk over a larger swath, right?
Going back to that myth that we talked about at the beginning, higher yield does not equal better income. Okay. So
it might
for a while.
But it could also, it does also mean higher risk. Things have a greater likelihood of going south on you. Right.
So the next way of generating, I guess, passive income is using bonds in a ladder. It's a common tactic known as a bond ladder.
We do them all the time.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of bond ladders.
So bond ladders are interesting, especially if you're using them for ultra short-term income needs within the next maybe 1 to 2 years. And so the idea with a bond ladder is, this is definitely more of an active strategy.
Oh, absolutely it is, yeah.
So it's worth noting that this is not typically something, when we're talking about passive income, this is not necessarily quite as passive. This is something that requires some setup up front.
Yes, and it requires some ongoing work as well.
Now, once it's set up, depending upon how long how far away in the future that you set it up. But the problem here is, especially with interest rates being so sensitive and possible or subject to change, you don't want to go too terribly far out in the future when you're implementing a bond ladder strategy. But the way that it works is you're typically buying bonds in different terms, at different terms and different lengths, right? So let's say you buy a 3-month bond and a 6-month bond and a 9-month bond and a 1-year bond, okay?
Right.
The idea is that you are using these bonds to generate active income for you over the course of the next year. So as you are using income and your income runs out over the next 3 months, the 3-month bond that you bought has matured and come due, and now the money that you had in that 3-month bond is now available to fund your cash needs for the next 3 months.
Right.
And then 3 months later, that original 6-month bond that you bought has now come due. You've spent your 3-month bond, okay? Now the 6-month bond has come due, and that's going to fund the next several months worth of income. And then the 9-month bond comes due, and then the 1-year bond comes due, and it's a domino effect, right?
That's exactly right.
And you can set that up pretty far out into the future if you would like. In theory, the problem is bond rates change.
Well, it's incredibly sensitive to inflation.
And very, very sensitive to inflation.
So, for example, when we do these as part of the income strategies we lay out with clients, we never go out more than 2 years, and it's because of inflation, right? When you're dealing, and we do these almost exclusively with U.S. government bonds, right? In theory.
Treasury bills.
Treasury notes, or Treasury bills, excuse me. Because in theory, this is the lowest risk investment that there is, right? So what you're doing by buying, take somebody's income needs and you put 3 months worth of it in cash. So let's just say January, February, March is in actual cash, right? Then the next 3 months being that April, May, June, you put that in that 3-month bond that matures right at the end of March. You're not getting huge amounts of interest off of that. Right? So when we talk about the yield that it's generating, we're not living off of that yield. What it's allowing us to do in a bond ladder is you don't have to invest quite as much, right? Because you're going to get a little bit of growth on it. You're just stretching your money a little bit further. I like to use the phrase, I'm squeezing nickels out of somebody's portfolio. We're not making a big money on this one, but we're doing it with a minimal amount of risk. You're laying out that, that first year, for example, then when that 1-year bond matures, you use that money to kind of start over for the next year. You don't go further out than that because you're getting 3.5% to 4.5% right now in these kind of vehicles. What if inflation were to start to go back up? Well, these things are not keeping up with it, which means your income is not keeping up. So you want to do fairly short windows of time when you're dealing with a bond ladder. To go out longer, which you can do, is not what I would consider to be very wise. It's just not very efficient at all.
Yeah, and this always goes into, we talk about the purpose of money a lot. We talk about it constantly. What is the purpose of money? The purpose of money is for you to spend it. Yep. And we need to assign a risk level to every dollar in your portfolio. The risk that's assigned to each dollar is totally dependent upon when you need access to that dollar as income.
Right.
Okay. So in this scenario, we're talking about ultra short-term income needs over the next two years. Yeah. This is kind of what you were alluding to with the bond ladders. Because we can't take much risk with that, right?
Right.
We need to take enough risk to get you some level of interest, right? We need to get you some level of income, but we can't subject it to market risk, right? And so this is why it's so important where so many folks get caught up on the idea of income. I need income. Income's great, and income is the end-all, be-all. It's nice, don't misunderstand, but it can't be the end-all, be-all, because anytime that you are generating income, you are sacrificing growth to some degree.
That's right.
Whether it's passive, whether it's active income, it does not matter. Anytime you're generating income is only generated from investments that are typically not growing much. So because you have to sacrifice growth, you're going to be sacrificing long-term growth potential for short-term income. If all of your investments are tied up in income-generating assets, you are going to be sacrificing a lot of long-term potential growth in the future. And that poses an opportunity that you're not exposed to the market, right? That's huge. So you're not going to be able to participate in market upswings over the next 10 to 15 years, let's say. And of course, you're also operating at the idea that there's never going to be inflation again, right? And so we need to make sure we're keeping up with inflation. Equities, long-term growth equities, is the number one way to keep up with inflation over the history of the stock market.
It's interesting that you say that. We hear people use the phrase no risk or low risk all the time. There's no such thing as no risk. It does not exist. You're just trading off one form of risk for another. So, for example, in the bond ladder, before we move on, what you're doing is you're trading in the risk of loss by using extremely low investment risk. But to your point, when you talk about the growth, you're trading that for opportunity risk, right? You're not going to make this money grow very much because you're investing it in something that is such a low yield. That is why you can't use a bond ladder for a long period of time, because you're missing out on that opportunity risk. And if you don't need this money for a lengthy enough period of time, you should be investing that in something that has a much, much larger opportunity to grow.
This is turning out to be a good topic.
Yeah, it is. We're not even approaching halfway through this.
And so I am realizing as of right now that we're going to need to make a part 2 out of this.
Yep, that's exactly what I was just thinking, because the next one, we could do a whole hour on the next thing that we've got written down.
Yeah, and we definitely could, and we definitely will in the part 2, because we still have a number of different topics here as far as passive income is concerned. But with that being said, before we kind of wrap things up,
let's talk bourbon.
Let's start the bourbon.
All right, so once again, I have had this, so...
This is the best Basil Hayden I've ever had.
Yeah.
It's definitely better than the regular. I'm not a fan. I mean, it's okay, but I'm really not a big fan of the regular. I do like the toasted, but I like this better than the toast. It's more complex, to your point, more sophisticated. I'll agree with that. Oaky.
A little vanilla?
Yeah, it says smoky. It's not. I don't think it's really smoky.
I don't get a lot of smoke out of it, no.
Yeah, I don't get a lot of smoke. I don't get much caramel. A little bit of vanilla maybe. But
okay, so I got some vanilla, and if you noticed, I just put a couple of drops in maybe the half ounce or so that I had left. I lost that vanilla. It disappeared, and the caramel started to come out. But because it's a low proof, it's not a lot of caramel. It's a very placid drink.
It's a very pleasant drink, though.
Yes.
I didn't water it down just because it's not.
I
knew that I would
just
lose.
to see if I could get some different flavors to come out.
I knew it would lose too much flavor if I watered it down. But no, it's good. It's a good kind of a daily type of a drinker, right?
Yeah.
It's easy. It's an easy drinker. Goes down easy. It's smooth.
Yeah, it does not have the complexity that I would expect from a 10-year-old. I think that's because it's only 80 proof.
But it's probably an easy drinker than most 10-year-olds.
Absolutely. Most 10-year-olds, you can't do this. I can tell you that I took a full bottle of this last year to a tailgate where there were about 15 people, most of whom were drinking soft drinks or beers. And most everybody said, yeah, I'd like to have a small little pour of that. I went through the bulk of a bottle in about an hour because everybody was like, wow, that's good. Can I have a little bit more? To your point, this is an easy drinker. So the danger of any kind of whiskey like this is that I just want a little bit more. And that's where you can get yourself in trouble, because if you have a little and a little and a little, that's called a lot.
Right? It's weird how that adds up.
You do have to be a little cautious with this one because it's such low proof. It's very easy to have one more than what you should have had. So that would be my caution with this.
That's kind of like, because I'm not a big beer drinker, but if I go to a restaurant and, we're drinking beer, right? Usually I order like some type of a stout or a Guinness when I like them better than like domestics, but it also kind of helps fill me up and it keeps me from drinking more.
Yep.
So instead of drinking, 4 beers, I'm content with one, maybe
something
2,
that
right?
I found in my youth, we've talked about college age and stuff like that. The way that I stopped drinking as much beer in my youth was I started drinking the good stuff, which I couldn't afford, right? Yeah. So you would only have one because you had to make this stuff last. I would highly recommend this for people, but it is because the price point. Remember, this is a $70 bottle.
Yeah.
If this was a $40 bottle, this would absolutely be the daily drinker.
I would steal this off the shelves.
Yes. I mean, just buy it by the case. It's a little pricey for something that is what you would call a daily drinker, and we don't mean that literally.
But if you're moving up market, This would definitely be one I'd want in my collection. This is good. I do like it.
This is a very, very good bourbon. It is. I agree with you. This is the best of the Basil Haydens, without question. And I've had all of the current ones that are out, and I've tried most of the previous ones that are no longer available. There's a couple of pretty good ones in that list, but the 10-year is by far the best. It is somewhat sophisticated. I wish there was a little bit more. I wish this was not a 10-year. I wish this was a 12-year, right? I think this would be fantastic at 12 years. So maybe they're listening. I doubt it very seriously. But this is one, if you've never had it, I would recommend that you definitely try it at least once because you'll enjoy this.
Yeah, it's a good pour. So let's go ahead and wrap things up here because we've kind of went down a little bit more of a rabbit hole than I was expecting to, but it was great. It was really good content, I think, because so many times, once again, we just hear so much. I get so many questions about income, and so many people mistake income as growth.
Yeah.
Mistake income as total return, and it is not. There's different ways.
Different.
There's different ways to get return in your portfolio, and income is a way to get return in your portfolio. But you don't want to have too much income in your portfolio because it will come at the expense of growth, long-term growth specifically. So you need to have a mix of both, right? That's why we talk about diversification of portfolios, right? It's not just diversification of different funds. It's the diversification of the types of income and the types of returns that you receive relative to your overall portfolio.
So when we talk about income investments, there are three that I hear the most, and we only tackled one of them today, and that was real estate income. So we definitely need to have a part 2 where we're going to talk about dividend income because we hear that one a lot.
We'll talk a lot about that one.
And then income annuities because we see that one a lot too. Keep in mind that pensions are a form of an income annuity. So although they work a little bit differently than what we're talking about here, I think that's a full show right there. So that's what we'll have to do for next week.
Absolutely. So keeps us from having to do research for our next topic, right? So it's easy for us. So
because it's Christmas time and it's not like we've got nothing else going on, right?
Yeah. Well, between that and we're moving offices, for those of you that don't know.
The view is going to change here within the next few weeks.
Going to change significantly in the next few weeks, and we are highly looking forward to it. We'll have to do one in our new golf simulator as well at some point, probably.
I don't know that we want to do one with us playing golf in the simulator.
Not
be good.
Not on video anyway, but anyway. With that being said, we'll wrap up part 1 of kind of the myths of passive income and busting some of those myths and some of the ways to generate income within a portfolio. We'll come back with part 2 next week. Thank you very much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate you joining us on the Retirement Planning Happy Hour, and we will see you next week.